Today's lesson is lesson 5-2, and we are talking about measurements of liquid volume and mass. So we're going to first start with liquid volume. Before we do though, make sure you have your name on your paper and your class number. So when we talk about liquid volume, we're talking about the amount of space liquid takes up. So if we're looking in a container that holds milk, we're looking at to see how much of that milk fills up the container. Or if we're looking at a water bottle that we drink from, we're thinking about the volume is the amount of space that it takes up inside that water bottle. And whenever we talk about volume, the base measurement of liquid is a liter. So it's important that we know what the base measurement of volume is, because we'll notice on our chart when we look later that every type of measurement in liquid volume has that base as its as part of the name of it, and it will help us understand the relationship between the different measurements. So this chart here should look kind of familiar to the previous chart that we talked about earlier today when we're measuring length, metric length. And I want you to first notice that every single measurement on this chart has its base measurement in the word, right? And we can see here the base measurement starts in the middle that has that box around it. The liter is that base measurement. I want you to go through and notice every time the measurement to the right and to the left has liter in it. So for example, I see liter here, liter here, liter here. Notice every single measurement has the base unit in it. Now, the only difference between each of the measurements is the prefix, right? So we see deciliter, centiliter, milliliter, and then over here, next liter, deciliter, hectoliter, and kiloliter. Now, if we look at how this chart is set up, we can think about the base unit as where we kind of start. And based on this base liter, it's like one of them. Everything to the right of the base liter is going to be a smaller unit of measure. So let's draw an arrow pointing to the right. These are all smaller units. So we can see after a liter, a deciliter is smaller than a liter, centiliter is smaller than a deciliter and a liter, and centiliter or milliliter is the smallest unit of measure for liquid volume that we are going to talk about. Now if we start at the base again and we look to the left of the base, let's draw an arrow, like all three of these, we know these are greater units of measure. Every time we move to the left, no matter if we start at the base or if we start at the smallest unit, whenever we move to the left, the volume, the liquid volume, the measurement is getting bigger. Every time we move to the right, no matter where we start on this chart, they are getting smaller. It's important for you to know how much smaller and how much bigger each time we move on the chart is. So if we look from each time we move from one measurement to the next, we know that it's grouped by groups of 10. So this, for example, if we start at liters, if we move one to the left, this is 10 times smaller. And then if we move two more to the left, it's 10 times smaller. So we have groups of 10 when we think about the relationship between each place value. So always think groups of 10 when we're thinking about how they're related to one another. Now we're going to have to practice how to convert. And convert means to basically change from, if we're given an amount, changing from one amount to a different amount of liquid volume to know how they're equal, right? So we're going to have to learn how to convert. Let's write that word down. And basically it means to change. And we're changing one measurement and we're trying to find its equal value of a different measurement in liquid volume. Here are some things you need to know. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky because it's kind of the opposite of what we think about. But when we think about converting units, metric units, we are thinking about how remember, groups of 10 that move from each one to each one. And we're thinking about, even though the measurements are getting smaller as we move to the right, we are thinking about how they need more of the smaller measurement to make the larger measurement. So when we are moving from a greater measurement to a smaller measurement, that means say we have liters and we're trying to figure out how many milliliters it makes, we are going to multiply by however many groups there are that we move. So for example, whenever we move from a larger unit to a smaller unit, we are multiplying by groups of 10, depending on how many times we move. So for example, if we're moving from liters to milliliters, I can count we're moving 1 group of 10, 2 groups of 10, 3 groups of 10. So I would multiply whatever liter I've got, and I would multiply 1, say I have 1 liter. 1 liter times 10, which is 10. 1 liter times 10 times 10, which is 100. And 1 liter times 10 times 10 times 10, which is 1,000. And so we would know 1,000 milliliters equals a liter. This is a good place to look down here to see how their relationships are. Now, same goes, now if we were to move the opposite way on the chart, if we were to move from a smaller unit to a larger unit, we're just thinking the opposite of what we did here for multiplication. We would divide, right? We would divide by groups of, remember, we're always dividing by groups or multiplying by groups of 10, because that is the relationship. So if I start with liters, and I'm thinking about, if I'm starting in kiloliters, which is a greater amount, and I want to change it to liters, I'm thinking about how many groups of 10, how many times do I need to divide by groups of 10 to get to my liter. So if I know that 1 kiloliter, we're going the wrong way. So if we're going from a smaller to a larger, we were going from a larger to a smaller. Say I wanted to go a milliliter and go back the way we came. I want to figure out how many liters or how many milliliters it takes to make a liter. I would be moving, since that is moving this way, these groups of 10s, I would divide by 10. Divide by 10. However many spots it takes to get to that larger unit. So if I know there's 1,000, say I have 1,000 milliliters, and I know I want to get over here and see how to convert it to 1 liter, I would divide by 10 once. So 1,000 divided by 10 is 100. I would divide by 10 again to get 10, and then divide by 10 one more time to get 1 liter. Okay? So just remember, whenever we're moving from a larger unit of measure or a greater unit of measure to a smaller, we're multiplying by groups of 10. If we're moving from a smaller to a larger, we are dividing by 10. So let's practice. Let's say, for example, we have 5 liters. 5 liters, and we're trying to figure out how many centiliters there are in 5 liters. We're trying to convert there. So let's take a look at our chart first. Always start with your chart, and let's find the unit that we know first. So I know that I have 5 liters. So I'm going to take a look at my chart for 5 liters. And I see 5 liter. I know my liter is right here in the middle. It's that base. I have 5 of them. So I'm going to say, and I know I want to get over to centiliters. So I'm going to count how many spaces I moved to get 2 centiliters. I moved 1, 2. 2 spots to get over to the centiliters. And I also want to think about, am I going from a larger unit of measure to a smaller, or am I going from a smaller unit to a larger? Well, I know liters are greater than centiliters, because I know as I move to the right on my chart, my units are getting smaller. So I know I'm moving to the right. I'm moving from a larger to a smaller. So I know I'm going to use groups of 10 to multiply. So if I have 5 liters, and I remember you multiply by groups of 10 depending on how many times you move. However many groups of 10 is however many times you move on the chart. So I know I moved 1 spot from liter to deciliter. So I know I'm going to multiply by 10. And then I moved 1 more. So I'm going to multiply by 10 one more time. So 5 times 10 is 50. 50 times 10 is 500. So I know 5 liters is equivalent to 500 centiliters. I want you to try that with 6,000 milliliters. How would we change 6,000 milliliters, convert it to liters? Think about how we're moving on the chart. Think about, do we need to multiply or divide by groups of 10? And think about how many spots you move. Okay? The last thing I wanted to talk to you today about is mass. And mass is actually the amount of matter in an object. It's different than weight. It's kind of hard to think about as far as it's not something that we like. It's hard to see, but just remember that it's not weight. It's not weight. It's different. And we need to know that the base of mass is a gram. So take a look at this chart below. You can see very similar relationships as we talked about in liquid volume. Notice that the base is in the middle, that gram, and notice that there's a base in every single word. Notice also that every prefix of these words are the same. Deci, centi, milli, deca, hecto, kilo. They're all the similar prefixes. So we know that if we know the relationships between liquid volume of the different measurements, then we know the relationship between the units of mass. It's the same thing. It's the same concept. If we move on the right, if we move to the right, we know our units are getting smaller. If we move to the left, we know our units are getting greater. And we know that it's still the same unit of measure. Same relationship. It's groups of tens. And so just like what we did to convert up here, we use the same procedure to convert it when we talk about grams as well. So make sure that you practice the 2 problems that are on your page below. So you should have 3 practice of converting when we come back to school tomorrow, and we will talk more about conversions and units of measure.